I don't mind at all, but I would just like to give everybody an introduction of who Dr. Diana Ürge-Vorsatz is. Uh, so I will take this opportunity to do that. She is a professor at the Department of Environmental Sciences and Policy at the Central European University. She was elected as Vice Chair of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in July 2023. In the sixth assessment cycle, she served as Vice Chair of IPCC's WG3, so the Mitigation Working Group. She was a coordinating lead author in both the fourth and fifth assessment reports of the IPCC. She is Vice President of the Hungarian Scientific Panel on Climate Change. She also holds a PhD from UC Berkeley and UCLA and worked in Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, among a lot of other achievements, which would take a long time to cover in this call. So I will just leave it at that. And yeah, at this point, I would love for you to take over.
Thank you so much. Again, it's a real privilege to be here. And since this cycle, we are really taking it very seriously to work closer with the youth and actually even children. So it's a fantastic opportunity for me to be able to talk to you at the beginning, well, pretty much at the beginning of this cycle. And hopefully after a bit more boring lecture or introduction, we can have some good discussion on on actually more opportunities and more ideas for you also how to engage. So in the meanwhile, if I'm confused, then it's only because it seems that it's only on my screen that I can admit participants, right? Nobody else seems to be able to get that. So I will have to stop always to admit participants because it's my meeting. In any way, so let's, okay, no, again, let me admit
Just
two more people.
Dr.
Or does
Vorsatz,
it get to you as well, Rochelle?
If you can make either me or Tanvi host, we can also let people in.
Oops, and how to do that? Okay, let me not stop sharing, and then let's see how to do that.
If you click on participants and then go on one of our profiles, the three dots on the side, and then you can make us host.
Okay. Let's make hosts, make co-hosts. Perfect. So then let's hope that now you will be able to see that, or maybe I can just make you the host actually. And then it's for sure. Okay, very good. So let me, okay, you are the host, so very good. Then you will then keep admitting then the people, and then I can just jump back into my presentation. So, oops, but please, then you have to allow me screen sharing.
That should let you do it, I believe.
Yes, I think it will work now. So that's where we were. And what is the IPCC? So the purpose of the IPCC, the mandate of the IPCC, and this is the official text, is to assess on a comprehensive, objective, open, and transparent basis the scientific, technical, as well as socio-economic information relevant to understanding the scientific basis of risk of human-induced climate change, its potential impacts, as well as options for adaptation and mitigation. Now, what's really important is this short little thing here, which says IPCC reports should be neutral with respect to policy, although may need to deal objectively with scientific, technical, and socioeconomic factors relevant to the application of particular policies. What this means in short is that our motto is being policy relevant, but never policy prescriptive. So that's important because whenever we are IPCC referred to as IPCC said that we should go to 2 degrees. IPCC said that we must reduce emissions by whatever % by then. No, IPCC never mandates anything of this or anything else. Always say, if you do this, this is going to happen. If you want to get there, then for that, this is what you need to do. But it's only what if type of scenarios. So we have had so far 6 assessment reports, and while you may be thinking that it's just like in this nice cartoon, so that we keep saying that, oh, there is a problem, and we have to ask genuinely whether the microphone is on. But in fact, actually, the IPCC has been a bit more than that, has been saying a bit more than that, that just we have a problem. So far we have produced 6 assessment reports, because this is our main activity. This is what our main mandate is, to do the so-called assessment reports, which assess basically all the breadth of climate change-related science, everything related, which is relevant to climate change, roughly every 7 years. But we also issue special reports, and some of them are right under here. For example, the carbon capture and storage one, which I will mention soon. Also, guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories and good practice guidance. These are the ones that are being used for how to report emissions. And finally, technical papers, although we haven't really used this tool since 2008. Now, yes, it's true that that we have always been already saying there is a problem, but we have always been saying more, and we have already had quite an impact. For example, not much after our first assessment report, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change has been formed. After this, our second assessment report, the Kyoto Protocol was negotiated, and that the IPCC assessment report has definitely is playing an important part. Now, after the third assessment report, adaptation got much more on the agenda, and after the fourth assessment report, the 2-degree centigrade limit was officially adopted by many international organizations, as well as we earned the Nobel Peace Prize together with former Vice President Al Gore. So to go on, so that's the Nobel Peace Prize. And after the fifth assessment report, the Paris Agreement was negotiated, for which the fundamental document was definitely the fifth assessment report. Sorry, so apologies. And our sixth assessment report has been a major input, or the foundation perhaps, of the global stocktake in taking place in Dubai. So the sixth assessment report was definitely the most active cycle we have ever had. It was also the longest cycle due to pandemic and other issues. But what we produced was not only the 3 regular, what we always do, the 3 assessment reports, the Working Group 1, Working Group 2, and Working Group 3, as well as the synthesis report. But we also produced 3 special reports. And perhaps our special report on the global warming on 1.5 degrees has definitely been has achieved the largest media coverage of any climate-related either report or even event. It has achieved more media coverage than any of the COPs, for example, altogether. So clearly, it was a landmark report, and also in its impact, which I now shouldn't necessarily detail, but I will say in a few words. But let's actually look at, just zoom in on the 6th assessment report cycle and a couple of the findings and a couple of the important implications. So first of all, it's really important to understand the IPCC could not be without all of you, without the enormous scientific community support out there in all the different countries. So if we look at the 3 working group reports, each of them have been written by almost 300 scientists each, but altogether it's over 700 scientists among the 3 working groups as authors, coming from close to all UN member states, but at least 130 countries have been involved in the different reports in the writing. But of course, it's not only the authors, because our reports are special exactly because of the enormous attention to review comments. If you look at it, this is by no means a joke or just a paper tiger or just a rubber stamping, because we for each of these reports received over 60,000 comments. And review editors are in place to assure that each of these comments, and here for the working group, one report is closer to 80,000 comments, that each of these are individually attended to and addressed, and they are implemented. Also, it's also important that we already have quite important citations, so scientific impact as well, not only policy impact. So the citations are also in the tens of thousands, which clearly no other scientific document. So it's unparalleled in the science community, and the synthesis report is not even here. And these are fairly new reports. So let me focus on actually just one area of the 6 assessment cycle, because it's, of course, it's so difficult to, what should I say in just a few minutes, when we're talking about literally tens of thousands of pages of reports. And whereas my colleagues often say that, oh, it's terrible because nobody ever reads so much, right? But the purpose of IPCC reports is not that everybody reads them, but the point is that you have kind of a Bible, you have a reference on every single topic, and these are also used in detailed textbooks and everything. So definitely they are being used extremely widely, even if nobody is even expected or even thought to read it to cover any of our reports. So let me actually focus on one area which is not so often emphasized. At the same time, it's very important with regard to the mitigation. So, but just to start off with it, let me show you from the special report on 1.5 degree global warming, the model pathways, how to reach 1.5 degrees. This is really quite important, because these are just 4 illustrative pathways. And now I didn't bring you the graph, which actually laid out all the different pathways in the spaghetti. And I think that is really a remarkable figure for the reason, because if you look at the figure, it's just a very, very faint line at 0. And before that report, net zero emissions was almost a scientific taboo, or it was more a tree hugger craziness to say that. Whereas that report, which really made it as a mainstay, not only that, but without actually saying that you need to go to net zero and anything, simply withdrew that 0 line in the emissions. And here it is kind of, here it is more apparent that there is the 0 line because it's divided, but in the scenarios, it just happens to be in the middle. And, you know, just most of these lines happen to cross the 0 line actually at mid-century. And just think about that when you say that IPCC has no impact. Just 3 years after the publication of our report, we published it in 2018, and already for the COP 3 years later. So in 2021, already as many countries had net zero commitments as that altogether accounted for 90% of all global emissions. So that means that both developing and developed and are all around mid-century. So that means that, yes, IPCC can have tremendous impact in the end, even though it, you know, we often see that the world is not moving ahead. It is moving ahead. It's not as fast as we would have to, but it's still really there are very important progress. So, but how we get to net zero is of course, we have lots of choices and lots of, well, less and less choices, but certainly lots of different challenges by the different types of pathways. So these are 4 illustrative pathways for how to get to net zero. And we seem to be heading very much in this pathway where the peaking is a bit later, starting to decline is a bit slower. But the price we pay for that is this, that towards the second half of the century, the only way then to still meet net zero is tremendous and gigantic net negative emissions in the second half of the century, which has started to raise a lot of alarms in the scientific community, most of all because at this time we mostly looked at bioenergy combined carbon capture and storage as the negative emissions. However, it is important to understand that today we have a much broader range of different negative emissions considered. Nevertheless, even whatever negative emissions technology you consider, at this scale, considering 20 gigatons of emissions, CO2 equivalent emissions per year, we are talking about really very, very gigantic carbon removal, and the cost of this is definitely not going to be small. So and not only the financial cost, but the scientific community in particular raised concerns about biodiversity loss, about the implications on the water resources, and especially the land requirements, since BECCS requires in the end a lot of land. So just doing 3 gigatons, which is more this scenario, the P2 pathway, even that would require in the order of magnitude land area that corresponds to 3 times the present land area required for cereal production, twice the annual water use that we currently use for agriculture, which we know is already scarce. So clearly very gigantic. So even already these scenarios have very major potential impact. So there was a lot of concern in the scientific community. And that's not even to mention that here there is a major intergenerational equity issue, that my generation is enjoying the benefits of the fossil fuels, but in the end, it's your generation which will be liable for this enormous cost that that negative emissions, deploying of negative emissions technologies will incur. So as a result, also the IPCC considered, and first the scientific community considered scenarios where there were no such big negative emissions. But these scenarios involve, I'm sorry. So it was clear that it is possible to still reach ambitious climate goals with such scenarios. Nevertheless, what is then required is that you do need to peak very soon and reduce emissions drastically. And the only way this could be done in most of the scenarios is a radical attention to energy demand. So partially this, and partially already because of lots of earlier attention to this, the sixth assessment report had a designated chapter on energy demand and services in the Working Group 3 report. So these were a novel but key pillar of mitigation in the sixth assessment report. For example, if you see, this was the cover page of the Working Group 3 report, not a big carbon capture storage plant, not a big wind farm, but just a nice, just a nice, simple net zero energy building. In fact, this is a social housing, a community built social housing with apparently very good well-being levels. So it communicates that that tackling mitigation through energy demand can not only help you with a lot of other social goals, such as, you know, good housing, quality housing, and low energy bills and energy security and so on, but also gives you a higher level, can give you a higher level well-being and a lot of other co-benefits. So yes, the report, even in this nice little cartoon or illustration, shows that there are the sectors which are really important. But first, before we even consider decarbonization in the different sectors, we should first ask, what do we really need the same amount of energy, the same amount of materials to achieve the same level of service, maybe higher level service? Could we do it with actually lower levels of energy and lower levels of materials, and perhaps still improve well-being? And then once we reduced this to as much as possible, then focus on how to decarbonize then the remaining already low energy and material demand that meets the service demands that we need. So, for example, it was very interesting how the different sector chapters worked independently of each other fully for the AR6 Working Group 3 report, and also for the summary of policymaker, they provided their inputs separately. But interestingly, if you look at the chapeaus of each summary of each sector chapters, each of them basically start out with the importance of the demand side. So, for example, the energy sector, reducing greenhouse gas emissions across the full energy sector requires energy efficiency and conservation is in the first sentence. If we look at the industrial sector, this also focuses on including demand management, energy and material efficiency, circular material flows, and so on. And it especially points out that there are many sustainable options for demand management and materials efficiency, and these options have potential being more used in the industrial practice and would need more attention from industrial policy, but are generally not considered in global scenarios nor in economy-wide scenarios. So that's the problem, that we know demand and services are so important, but right now most of the scenarios don't actually consider these. So let's go on. Also, the urban areas start actually at ambitious mitigation efforts in cities encompass reducing or changing energy and material consumption, electrification, blah, blah, blah. So also there is the more important, and in the building summary, even the first sentence already alludes to, goes even further and says it also needs to combine ambitious efficiency, renewable energy, and other measures. So yes, the sixth assessment report focused very much on the demand side, especially in developing countries. We pointed out that this is put together from different chapters. Most technological, social, and business model innovations are needed for rethinking and restructuring existing urban space. This is, of course, very relevant for our upcoming special report. Repurposing, retrofitting, and reusing existing infrastructure, vehicle stocks, and equipment, rather than having to produce new. Of course, this is quite different, significantly different in rapidly growing cities or emerging cities in the global south. But this is where, again, significantly more responsibility lies with the developing world, the global north. And this is a really important figure that may not have caught your attention. There is so much information on this, but it has a lot of really important points packed into, condensed into one figure. So let me just highlight a couple of the really important messages from this. So first of all, it just reinforces that the major inequality in emissions, that just the top 1% of the global population emits 15% of all emissions. In fact, if we take together the top 10% of the global of the elites, we can recognize that 52%, so more than half of all emissions, are due to a narrow elite of the top 10% of the most affluent in the global community, whereas the vast majority of the developing world, or 48% of the population is, 90% of the population only emits less than half of all of the emissions. So truly, it's really important, because that means climate policies should really be focusing on this, because here there is very little mitigation that we can squeeze out of this part. And also they would be affected most in their well-being and in terms of their development opportunities. So that's really a very important conclusion that for the first time the IPCC has put their finger on. Another really important point was, which is communicated in this figure, but said in this chapter 5 of the 6th assessment report, is that yes, lifestyle changes are very important, and we can save as much as 50%, up to 50%, sorry, up to 70% of emissions just by demand side reductions. However, what is really important, that if it only happens by most of you being so nice to understand that there's a problem and suddenly trying to change just your lifestyles on your own, it's not going, and all of us, let's assume, it's not going to save more than 5% of total global emissions. Why? Because individuals are important, but people alone cannot bring the change. We need infrastructure, we need technology access, we need incentives, and we need equity. And only if you have the proper, if you are able to meet the proper choices and affordable choices, and you always have, and you are already even incentivized, nudged to make the proper choices, or the choices, the lower emission choices, then if we have those supporting environment and systems, so that's why we need systemic change, because if you once you have a systemic, supportive system and systemic transformation, yes, with demand-focused changes, we can have a 70% reduction without actually major behavioral sacrifice, because that's another point that we know that from behavioral sciences, that just people deciding to change their lifestyles does not last long. It's not sustainable. Most people are not in their adulthood and are not able to sustainably change their lifestyles, except for a few exceptions. Now, another really important conclusion is that, because it also relates to, what can I do? And whenever we think, what can I do? And whether we talk about what can I do, it's always about what we can do in our free time as a consumer. But in fact, being a consumer is only a very small part of our lives. In fact, we spend most of our times, for example, as professionals. You all are probably studying something, or you will, or might already be working something. In fact, we spend more of our awake hours as professionals rather than the consumers. And also, we actually can make a much bigger difference as professionals rather than consumers on emissions. We're also role models. All of you, I'm sure, are posting regularly on social media. That means it's a conscious choice what we are posting, how we are influencing our communities in terms of the directions. We are also investors. Probably you are not yet big investors, but you will become soon. As soon as you have your bank account, as soon as you have some pension accounts, all of these are already means that you are investors. And we are also citizens, which means not only means necessary elections, but also just as citizens, we have lots of other ways to influence governmental or municipal decisions. So that means that that it's really important to communicate whenever you go on, that the science says lifestyle changes should not start from when you close the door of your work or of your university and go out of there, but in fact should rather start when you enter your university, enter your work, because most of us professionals, or in the top 10%, really are most influential throughout our work. So just the choice of what profession you are studying and what profession you will choose will influence your lifestyle, your lifetime emission impact significantly more than how many plastic bags you use, or whether you're vegan or not, which I'm not saying you shouldn't, and all of these are important as well, but the overall emissions impact, and because we cannot fight on each front, we cannot fight a battle on every front. And if you want to pick your battles, then you should really pick the battles through your what you're studying and through your profession and the choice of your profession, because you can make the biggest impact through that. So these are what is the recent science of the IPCC says, which is very relevant for you and for novel for how we approach individual action, because it has been very different. Especially, we also document now that many companies have been trying to push the responsibility on the consumer, on the individual lifestyle, on behavior, lifestyle choices, and we know it just doesn't work. Perhaps that was the reason why this, and it is documented in our report from a scientific basis, that perhaps this was actually the purpose. Now, so these were some of the highlights of some of our important findings, but now let's go back to why is the IPCC so unique? Why is it being copied so much? So it's not only copied now to IBES, the Intergovernmental Panel on ecosystems, biodiversity and ecosystem services, and all the different other platforms. It's also being in different environmental areas. It's also being copied for nationally. Many countries have their own national IPCC panels and IPCC reports. So what is the trick? Why is also the UNFCCC utilizing it so much? Why is it so much widely used? Now, one of the important reasons why it is, so some of the important reasons why it is used so much is, first, because it is voluntary. And despite that it's voluntary, nobody actually in the IPCC is getting paid, except perhaps for a few, perhaps the co-chairs and the secretariat, but the secretary different, they are to serve IPCC. But those who are actually doing the elected and chosen work of the IPCC, all of them are supposed to be volunteers, except perhaps the co-chairs, because you cannot expect anyone to do full-time work without actually having some sort of financing, so some sort of income. But it's not the IPCC who supports them, but it's the governments who nominate them. So also, we don't accept any funding from anywhere except for governments. And governments also have to do it on a voluntary basis without tagging. They cannot say what it can be spent on. We have very thorough conflict of interest procedures, and also we manage these very thoroughly. We are also trying to be as transparent, as diverse and inclusive as it's just possible. Also, I think the unique about the IPCCs and the real trick about this is the knowledge co-production process. And I know this is being criticized heavily for many reasons, that we work together with governments. However, I do believe this is the strength. There are many processes out there which don't have this co-generation process together with policymaking. But this is why this is unique. This is why policymakers listen, because we are relevant to them, because we take because they help us already ask the questions. I will explain more about the process. And also we have an extremely thorough review procedure, and also because of policy relevance, but not policy prescriptiveness. So let's see a little bit on the assessment report. What are our plans? So first of all, we are aiming to, in this cycle, to make sure we are really robust, comprehensive, accurate, inclusive. So that's really important that we want to, I actually, as I said, I just came from to this meeting. I left our big meeting of the Bureau, where we're thinking how to improve inclusivity even further. That means we want to tap into diverse knowledge sources and diverse literatures, including indigenous people's knowledge and local communities' knowledge, and also youth knowledge. And generally, we want to work more also for the youth. So what will be the product in the 7th assessment cycle? The plenary, the 60th plenary of in Istanbul has established that we will have the 3 assessment reports, the traditional ones that we have always had, including as well as a synthesis report. As a special report, we will only have 1 special report, the special report on climate change in cities, which is already ongoing. We will also have a methodology report on short-lived climate forcers, as well as on carbon dioxide removal technologies, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And we will also update the 1994 IPCC technical guidelines on impact and adaptation in conjunction with the working group 2 report, and it will be published as a separate product. So I don't want to bore you with the timeline, but basically we will start working right now, and we'll have a very busy time until 2027, where in 27 we are going to have several reports out, and we probably will have, this has not yet been decided, but we hope to have as many of our assessment reports as we can before the second global stock take, but it still depends on many things. And we will finish by the synthesis report by late 2029. So there has never been so much attention and so much expectation from the IPCC. And this is a picture from the huddle from the Istanbul plenary. As you see, this was already after 40 some hours of continuous work without a break, no night's sleep at all. There are so many people in a huddle. It's supposed to be small, but it has become really big and very intensive. So there is a lot of major interest and expectations from the IPCC. So it's not going to be easy, but it's great, because what we decide will have really significant implications, and what we do will have implications. So in addition to the reports I mentioned, we are also going to have several expert meetings and workshops. So these are also important, because these are also opportunities for engagement. Our first expert meeting that we are going to have is exactly the one, on the topics that I already mentioned. So the first expert meeting will be in October in Canada on gender, inclusivity, and diversity in IPCC. And there, I hope we can also discuss the issue how we can include more the youth in our processes, but it's only right now my idea, and I'm sure my colleague Ladislas Changa, who is helping me, or actually he's leading on youth engagement, but we do it together. He's also vice chair, agrees with me, although we have not yet discussed this particular point. So this is special report, as I mentioned. It is coming. We are going to have the scoping meeting in April. We are working on the impacts of climate change on cities, adaptation strategies, mitigation measures, and the role of cities in climate action. And if you want in more detail, here are some of the further points. This is what we'll talk about, but basically we need to cover everything related to cities and climate change, which is a very broad area. So how you can engage? There are many, many ways, much more ways than you can imagine. So please bear with me in the next couple of minutes while I summarize for you. But then, of course, we can also turn to your questions. So in order for you to understand how to engage, it's good to take a peep, a snapshot of what how the IPCC consists of. So first of all, it's important that we have the 3+1 working groups. We have the plenary that decides on, basically they lead the IPCC, they decide what the IPCC should be doing and how, We have the bureaus, the executive committee, and of course the authors and scientists who do the report, but review editors as well as expert reviewers. So let's see how you can engage based on this structure. So first of all, the plenary is where you also can engage, because, and hopefully you are going to be engaged, because my understanding is that hopefully YOUNGO is going to be an observer to the IPCC soon, which I believe would be very important. Right now, we don't have many youth or children's organizations as observers, and that's really important that we have more of these from this community observers. Well, at least, of course, I'm not prescribing anything, but I think it's just good to have, it's valuable for both the IPCC as well as the observers. So that's one of the ways how you can engage. In the Bureau, it's now too late because the Bureau has been voted in last July, and I'm privileged to be voted as the vice chair, one of the 3 vice chairs for this cycle. But you can always aspire to become a Bureau member later in your career. The executive committee is basically just a smaller part of the Bureau. However, in the 4 working groups, there is a lot of opportunities to engage. So first of all, it's important to understand that right now, most of the working groups are hiring in their technical support units. And young scientists, just fresh graduates, this is a really prime opportunity to start your engagement with IPCC. Most people who, well, first of all, most people love working in technical support units. It's really a fantastic job. But also they then become very close to the IPCC, and most often they continue in different other, well, they don't have to, but most often they do choose to continue in different other capacities in connection with the IPCC. So being applying for one of the jobs, and all of these are currently having jobs still open. So do look at their websites or the IPCC website for these positions, but it will be fast running out because we are filling in these positions soon. Now, in the reports, you can certainly become an author. Nevertheless, you may be too young for that, but we do hope to have more early career scientists. But for that, even that, you do need already some credentials. So in the future, you can become to be nominated for an author. Until then, another really good way to get engaged, several other good ways to get engaged, is to be a so-called chapter scientist. Each of the chapters will have 2 chapter scientists, one from the global north and from the global south. And in fact, they do a lot of the really important work related to the IPCC writing process. So really look out for these, or perhaps YOUNGO could be active in, perhaps someone from the science group could be watching these different calls for applications and disseminate that among your community, because chapter scientists are a really tremendous opportunity. And I don't think there is any chapter scientist who worked hard and would not have been rewarded very highly for their work with later high-level engagement. There is one chapter scientist who made it to the synthesis report summary for policymakers as an author. So really, if you work hard, you can get very, really benefit from your career. Another way is to become just an expert reviewer. Anyone with some basic scientific credentials can become an expert reviewer. And it's really very important that we have more and more young voices as well, reviewing our reports and providing input into how we are doing, and whether, so to provide your perspectives as well. Of course, it has to be rooted in science. It cannot be, I don't like this, or I think, no, it has to be with scientific arguments supported by scientific references. But still, without this, it seems like a small gray circle, but this is the crucial part of IPCC process. This is how even 300 authors cannot ensure that all perspectives are included. So inclusivity of IPCC reports is really tremendously depends on a wide community of engaged expert reviewers, all of you, which you can be and you should be. And I do hope that YOUNGO Science Group will be very active in reviewing our different drafts for our different reports regularly. So that's a really important way to engage. So here are the different other methods. But before that, let me just go through the process of producing a report. So scoping is produced with experts. On the other hand, in the scoping, we do invite also some government or other decision makers. For example, for the city special report, we included a lot of city decision makers. Because this is, again, knowledge co-generation process, then outline is approved by the panel, so by policymakers, but in the end, they cannot ask for very radical changes, and also those are just what is influenced by or underpinned by the science. Now, this is the point where this is the co-generation process. Now, here the policymakers leave the room. In this next, all the way until this point, it's only the experts and authors working. So it's only the scientific community working. We have a first order draft, and there is actually the first review is by experts. And only actually the second order draft is reviewed by the government. So this is where they are coming back. They provide their comments as well, also only underpinned by the science. And in the end, it's still the scientists working. The reports are actually only written by the scientists. It's only the summaries for policymakers, which are approved by governments. And it's only the phrasing of these sentences. And it all has to be in the report already. So it's all coming from the report. Nothing can be made up by governments. Nothing can be, ruined by the governments, because everything is in the underlying reports. It's only a matter of fact what we emphasize from these reports. And so this is the acceptance of the reports and finally publications. So this is the process. So again, there are many areas, many points at which you can engage. I already mentioned a few. In the special report for cities, actually, we have innovated a new process how to engage the pre-scoping webinars, which means that those who did not make it to the scoping meeting selection, through the selection, they can also engage and provide their comments and suggestions through these webinars, and it will feed into the process. Now, of course, the most important that you can do, even if you're young, you can publish. Many of you are PhD students, or even if you're master students, you can publish. So please do publish your knowledge, your literature, your science, your research. Publish it because any IPCC report is only as good as, it says my internet connection is unstable. I hope it's not. So that our reports are only as good as the scientific literature. So if you don't publish your perspective, your views, your findings, your cutting edge, we will not be able to include it in our reports. So that's really important. Now, beyond the ones that I already mentioned, it's also possible to participate in expert meetings. One other ways, which I'm just still hoping, that we hope that we can, we are trying to innovate that already at the city's scoping meeting, special report scoping meeting, to involve young scholars or even child speakers in our opening ceremonies, so that we get some of the youth perspectives in these processes better. So in addition to that, further opportunities for engagement, I mentioned already technical support unit staff, also hosting lead author and expert meetings. Of course, you're too young, but you can persuade your university to volunteer for there. We will need many sites and venues for lead author and expert meetings. So that's also a good opportunity, because then your community will be much closer engaged with the IPCC authors and the IPCC process. But you can also organize outreach events. For example, this one, we can count this as an outreach event. But you can do your own. If you want IPCC materials to be distributed, disseminated, discussed, we can support you from the IPCC Secretariat or the different working groups, and you can organize outreach events to different communities. Also, translating, let's face it, our materials are scientifically very complex materials. However, you can help us translate these to different stakeholder communities. So children, to youth, to women, to indigenous peoples, to whichever community you are from or you find important stakeholders in the climate process and action. Also, you can translate our product into different languages. I mentioned already becoming an observer organization, but also just following us on social media. You can also follow me. You can also follow IPCC, reposting our messages, reposting our announcements, and also, for example, translating them to your home languages, different languages. All of these can make tremendous impact and can be tremendous help to us, which we do not have the capacity for. We are really run on a shoestring because we are basically almost fully a voluntary organization. So this is how much I wanted to say in terms of what I could say. But I'm really not only really open to your questions, but I'm really also very curious about your ideas, how the IPCC could stronger engage with the youth, with young scientists, and the youth in general. So here are some of my social media handles in case you want to engage through them and help us, but also the IPCC is on every major social media. So with that, I just want to stop sharing and thank you for your attention. And I'm very much looking forward to your questions and comments.